world according to Jesse.
I'm pleased to welcome back Jen Briney, host of the Congressional Dish podcast. She joins me today to discuss the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. That's quite a mouthful. Jen, thank you. As I said before we went on the air, I want to thank you because you allow me not to keep track of Congress because you do such a great job of it. So all I got to do is bring you on to learn what Congress is doing or not doing, as it might be. But anyway, Congress passed the CARES Act to address the economic fallout from the coronavirus, COVID-19 pandemic. But many people still haven't seen any financial aid. Based on what you've read in the pages of that bill, will the average or poor Americans finally get their hands on the aid that Congress promised them?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. I always love doing your show. So after I read the CARES Act, it really depends on what kind of aid you're talking about. So some people were sent stimulus checks, and I know that those are being held up in the mail because Trump wanted to have his name on them, but they will arrive. I have no doubt about that. Same with the unemployment benefits. People are having trouble signing up for that. But I myself have been on unemployment, and I know once you're in the system, the checks do arrive. So I'm confident about that. The one thing, though, is that they've been promised, small businesses in particular, have been promised these loans that are forgivable. And the program is good, but the problem is that the funding is limited. And even though it's designed, or it was supposed to be designed to be for small businesses, big businesses have access to it and they're draining it. And so people are going to be left out of that system. So it's really a mixed bag. It depends on what you're looking for.
Okay, now people need hope right now. And before we dive into all the rest of the problems out there, what's Congress's response to the outbreak and some of the positives? Tell us some of the positives that have come out of this act, if there are any.
Sure. Oh, yes, there's definitely positives because what we're looking at is a fire hose of money. And so some of it for sure is going to end up where it's needed. So there's a significant amount of money that's going to be directed specifically for hospitals. There's services now for the elderly. They're going to be able to get taxpayer provided food delivery so that they don't have to leave the house. There's also rules that can help a lot of us. So for instance, insurance companies are going to be required to pay for testing for not only COVID-19, but also the antibodies to see if we've had it before. There's a pause in student loans. You don't have to make payments until September 30th. And my favorite thing about this is that the unemployment expansion provisions are really strong. It's a legit, well-funded safety net that's going to help millions of people. So there's definitely good things in the CARES Act to balance out all the bad.
Okay, now the federal response to the crisis highlights just how bad the economic inequality is in America. Why are the wealthy companies and people getting financial aid before their poor counterparts do?
Well, I think it's the nature of the fact that big businesses have many avenues for getting cash. So they have ones that already existed. They can go to the banks. They're big customers. They can get loans quite easily. They have stock market access. That's how they can raise capital. And then Congress gave them even more avenues for cash. So they can get these direct loans now from the Treasury Department and from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve ones have very few restrictions. And also the big businesses, like I said, have access to the small business loans. And the reason that that's possible is they defined a small business as a business with fewer than 500 employees per physical location. And so that loophole, the location thing, it allows stores like restaurants like Fogo de Chao, fancy steakhouses all over the country, but each individual store has less than 500 employees. And so that big business has access to the small business funds, and that's why it's running out of money as quickly as it is. And so because the big businesses have all these avenues for cash, and the few ones that are available for smaller, less wealthy people have less cash and are limited, it's kind of the same thing that happens in society in general. The wealthy have more access to cash. We don't, and so a lot of people are getting left out. But there's a loophole in there that needs to be closed to make that better.
Well, you kind of touched on it. The big banks have also played favorites by letting wealthy clients, of course, they cut the line to receive paycheck program loans. And in the first round of those, it seemed the funding was very unfair. Will this practice stop now from the banks, or do you think it will?
No, not at all. Because
No.
So Congress came back and put more money in the small business fund, but they didn't prohibit any banking behavior. Instead, what Congress decided to do, their solution, was to require 20% of the new money to flow through smaller banks. But even a small bank can prioritize their wealthiest customers, and 80% of the money can still flow through big banks, and they're still legally allowed to decide in what order to submit applications. And so that behavior, it can still continue, and I think that it will.
Now, some paid sick leave policies have been expanded, but what about the people who've simply lost their jobs? Will congressional aid truly help them?
I think it really will. Like, I was pleasantly surprised with how strong the unemployment provisions are. They expanded it, because usually you have to kind of work for a company to have access to it. But now sole proprietors and people that are like Lyft drivers and Uber drivers, there's a lot more people that have access to unemployment than had it before. And my favorite thing about it is that the program goes through the end of the year, but it can be extended without Congress doing anything. So they also made it so that you don't, like, unlike with the Paycheck Protection Program, the small business loans, Congress needs to keep coming back to refill the money. That's not the case with unemployment. So this isn't one that's just going to disappear. So yes, people that lose their jobs and even their businesses, there is a safety net, and it is a good one. And I think those people will be okay.
Now, in some parts of the country, people are protesting the quarantine by defying it and defying social distance rules. In your opinion, where's the line between personal freedom, public safety, and an authoritarian government? Excuse me, I'll get that out.
Isn't that the question? For me, the line for me is, I look at the new rules and I say, is this scientifically necessary to maintain public safety? So for instance, mandating that people stay 6 feet apart because it's sneezing distance, that makes sense to me. It feels okay. However, telling people that, yes, you can go to Home Depot, but you can't buy flowers while you're in there, that has nothing to do with safety. That's crossing the line. That's not okay. And so that's my line. But what I think we have to be really careful about is when we find out one of these new rules is considered necessary to begin with, but then new data tells us that it's not, we have to make sure that these rules are rescinded. And so I think it's also very important as we go forward to be communicating with our members of Congress when we see that line being crossed, because I do have concerns that we're going to put rules in place and never take them back. And so that's the line that I'm going to be looking for.
Now, Congress has given an immunity provision to companies that make medical equipment, such as masks, to shield them from lawsuits. Is there a credible reason for doing this?
Well, I think for the masks that there was, because we had companies that were making masks that were meant for construction, and they were then sending those masks to the hospitals when we realized that we had very few masks available. Now, the problem is that construction masks and medical masks are made differently and tested differently. The construction ones are not tested to make sure that water can't get in. And so since all of this is being transmitted through water droplets, that was a situation where we didn't want these companies being punished for a truly good deed. So I think the mask one is appropriate. However, Mitch McConnell is saying it's a Senate Republican priority to give more companies immunity. And outside of this mask situation, immunity from lawsuits is not appropriate, especially as we move into a phase where we need to trust that businesses are cleaning properly and social distancing and having all these new policies. So we need them afraid of lawsuits to make sure that they do the right thing. And so for masks specifically, yes, there's a reason. For other companies, no. So you really have to look at it case by case.
All right. Now, Jen, before we end, are there any silver linings? Is there any hope for us getting back on track in the future?
Yes. My hope it rests in election 2020. I love that it is an election year, which means that we have the entire House of Representatives up for firing and a third of the Senate. And I'm just feeling that this botched response to COVID-19, I mean, the unequal treatment of the wealthy and us regular people is so obvious, even to the people that are only kind of paying attention, that I'm hoping that maybe this is the year that we take more seriously our responsibility to elect good people to Congress. And the opportunity is right in front of us. It's less than 6 months away. So yes, of course, there's hope. We have control in a democracy, and hopefully we use it.
All right, Jen, we're out of time. I want to thank you again for coming on and helping us with all this congressional stuff. Look forward to having you back again. We'll have you back, especially before the election happens. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
The world according to Jesse.
Thanks for watching. Send us your comments on social media for a chance to be featured next week. As always, we'll be covering more stories ignored by the corporate media.
And as always, people, remember, when the government lies, the truth does indeed become a traitor. Stay vigilant now more than ever.
The world according to Jesse.